Good morning, everyone, and welcome to VC Ag Today, May 21st, 2020. Appreciate everybody joining us this morning. We're very excited. We've got a great presentation in store. I think really excited about our topic today. Today we'll be covering some basics on farm business management. So we're fortunate to have Dr. Alex White, who is an instructor through the Dairy Science Department at Virginia Tech. Dr. White will share some comments with us today. Before we get started, I'd just like to let everyone know to try to increase the security for our meetings. We have made some amendments to mute all of our participants that are joining us this morning. You won't have the option to unmute yourself until the end of the presentation. So we just ask if you have questions or comments to try to please save those towards the end of the presentation. The chat box is open if you're joining us via a computer or laptop or tablet. So if you have a question or a comment, feel free to put that into the chat box and we'll try to address those as they come up and also answer some questions towards the end. But if you have those comments, just add those in there if you would. But other than that, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. White. We appreciate Dr. White joining us this morning. And Dr. White, the show is yours.
All righty. Thank you, Robbie. Appreciate it. Let's play around with the, see if I can share my screen with you here. And hopefully you're seeing my intro slide. Is that right?
Yes, sir, Dr. White. It's coming through.
All right. Great. Thanks, Robbie. Well, good morning, folks. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope you're staying safe. Hope you're not getting washed away with all this rain. In Blacksburg, we are still under a flood warning. There's an awful lot of water in the ground around here, or on top of the ground at the moment. But really appreciate you asking me to come speak to you here today. I'm going to try and just give you some general farm management and finance tips. Not going to get real deep into anything because there's so many different types of operations over in your area. But we'll talk a little bit about crops, a little bit about livestock, a little bit about aquaculture possibly. But just going to give you some tips, some things to be thinking about in case 2020 is not going to be a very good year for you. And that's going to depend on your what your enterprise happens to be. So first piece of advice, just stick to your fundamentals. As farmers, as ag producers, you are already used to making decisions in uncertain times. You never know exactly what's going to happen with the markets, what's going to happen with the weather. So this is just an exaggerated case of the uncertain times. But if you just think about what's important to you, think about your core values, think about your goals, what you want to accomplish with your farm, with your operation, with your family, with your personal life, that's going to really help you make better decisions. Next thing, like always, have a plan. If you go into this situation with a plan, this is what I'm going to produce, this is how I'm going to sell it, this is when I'm going to sell it, this is how I'm going to protect my price and so on. That's going to just clarify things. It's going to make your decisions a lot easier, but don't just have a plan. Always come up with a backup plan or a couple of backup plans. I preach to my kids in my classes, and by kids, I mean that respectfully, but I preach to them, come up with 3 plans for everything. Have 3 alternative markets. Have 3 plans for reaching your goals in the future. That way, if your main plan doesn't work, you've already thought about 1 or 2 backup plans. So main thing I can tell you is revisit your goals, think about what's important to you, and then base your decisions on that. That's going to just make you more grounded. It's going to make your decisions a whole lot more clear for you. So you're already used to doing this. Let's hold the course. So when you're thinking about making some changes to your operation or planning for what you're going to do for this fall or early next year, I just want to keep it simple and use what we call the partial budget framework. And the thought process is really simple. It's this is one of my economic rules I preach to my students. If something costs more than it's worth, don't do it. So a partial budget just looks at what are the added costs versus, and compares that to the added revenues. And if it costs more than it's worth, you're going to reduce your profits, and that's probably not a good move in a lot of cases. So with the partial budget, hopefully you've seen this somewhere along the line. But what we're going to do is focus on just the things that are going to change with your decision. So, for example, if you're thinking about storing your crop, you're not going to sell it at harvest, but you're going to store it till March. We're going to think about the good side and the bad side. The good side of the partial budget is going to be what extra revenues are you expecting to earn by doing this, and what reduced expenses are you going to have. Excuse me. In this case, if we're looking at storing a crop, we're not going to have reduced expenses. We're actually going to have increased expenses. But hopefully we'll get a higher price for our crop when we sell it, so that'll be our added revenue. On the bad side of this decision, will we get reduced revenues, and will we have added expenses? So we need to think, what's going to change if we store our crop for another 3, 4, 5 months, whatever it happens to be? Well, if we're doing that, we're going to have added expenses, and hopefully our revenues will not be reduced, but we just need to think this through. So this framework, if you just slow down whenever you think of making any type of decision, just break it into the good side and the bad side, and let's look at it. What are the added revenues and reduced expenses that I expect to get with this with this change in the operation? And on the bad side, what's the reduced revenues or increased expenses I'm going to have? And if the bad side comes out to be bigger than the good side, that means your profits should increase if all goes to plan. But we also need to think about other factors as well. So with your thought process, whatever decisions you're making, just try and break it down and keep it this simple. I think it'll help you clarify what you're actually, or what your possible actions are going to be. Now then, sounds simple, but here's a couple of the tricks that are involved. We need to figure out what are the prices going to be at the time of sale. If we're holding our calves a little bit longer, we're going to hold our crops a little bit longer. How do we know what the future prices are going to be? And you know as well as I do, they're highly variable. They depend on an awful lot of factors out there, but we need to take our best guess. Another thing that's really impacting agriculture right now is what's the state of the processors or the markets now and when you're planning to sell. In the case of the livestock industry, if you're looking at sending calves to a market today, there may not be space for them, so we may have to hold on to them. So you need to start making decisions. Do I hold them back a little bit? Do I feed them as normal? So we need to get a good idea. What's the state of the processors, or what's the state of the market going to be in your area at the time you're planning to sell? Next question. What's everybody else going to do? In agriculture, you never know. You know, people will tell you what they're going to do and then do something else. But we need to sort of get a feel for if everyone else is going to plant corn. Do you want to plant corn, or do you want to switch to a different enterprise? So we need to have a pretty good idea of what's going on in the overall market, what everybody's plans are. The next two on here, what's going to be the impact of trade and politics? And your guess is as good as mine on that one. In agriculture, we are highly dependent on international trade. So we need to figure out what's going to be the state of international trade over the next year or so. How's that going to impact consumer demand? How's that going to impact prices? So this is something that's a complete wild card. Then we see wave 2 and wave 3 of this coronavirus outbreak. Who knows what's going to happen with that and how that's going to impact it? But we need to have a plan set up. What do we think is going to happen? What are the best case and worst case scenarios, and develop our plan from that standpoint. But the bottom point on this slide is one I really want everyone to understand. That doesn't matter what type of enterprise you're running, or what type of farm, or what type of business you are, you need to know your cost of production. What does it cost you to produce a bushel of corn, or an extra pound of gain on your calves? Excuse me, an extra gallon of oysters, whatever it happens to be. You absolutely, positively have to know your cost of production. This is going to help you make marketing decisions. It's going to help you figure out planting decisions and input decisions. So we need to have a record system that accurately tells you what is your cost of production. Okay, so my first point on there is what's going to happen to prices over in the future. I just picked some numbers off of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And with corn, if harvest price looks to be somewhere around $3.32. If we hold it till March, the price is going up about 13 cents a bushel. So that says, hey, maybe you want to think about storing your corn a little bit if we can do it for less than 13 cents a bushel. Soybeans, November price, $8.45, a March price of $8.35. That's a pretty clear signal that storage is not going to be a profitable option if prices remain at these levels. For your feeder cattle and live cattle, I've adjusted these for slide, because if we hold the calves longer, they're going to be heavier. So I put a couple hundred extra pounds on them, so we can sort of take our best guess what's going to happen to our future prices out there, and so on. So use your marketing specialists, use your websites, use your futures prices to get a good feel for what's going to happen to prices around sale time. Next thing, what's going to happen to the ag supply chain? Right now, meat, milk, vegetables, some of the areas of aquaculture have been disrupted pretty significantly. Honestly, from the meat standpoint, I'm expecting no sooner turnaround than a year or two till we can get recovery back to something normal. So what can we do over the next few years if you're a livestock producer to make ends meet? Personally, I'm looking for large structural changes in the U.S. I would not be at all surprised to see a move towards supply control. From the dairy standpoint, we're looking at going back to a quota system. But could this happen in other enterprises as well? I think that it's very much a possibility over the next 3, 4, 5 years. Another thing is they move away from the concentration of processing. Most of the processing is sort of, it's concentrated in 3 or 4 main firms around the United States. It's highly efficient, which means they can produce get the product out the door a heck of a lot cheaper per unit. However, we're seeing what's the impact if one of these plants goes down or if several of them are shut down for any reason, just how disruptive that is to the market. So I would not be at all surprised if we moved away from this concentration. We went to more local processors. One thought I've had for several years, I guess last 10 years or so, is, let's have concentrated kill stations, but then have individual breaking stations, local or smaller breaking stations or processing stations around the state, so that we can process the carcasses and keep that supply out there to the consumers. So I'm kind of thinking something like that's going to pop its head up over the next couple of years. But again, it's going to be move away from efficiency. So it's going to be decreased efficiency, which means we're probably going to see higher consumer prices. And then we always need to ask ourselves, what's going to be the impact on demand? At higher prices at the consumer level, is that going to significantly change the amount of livestock products or vegetables that they're going to purchase? And similarly, if we move away from the just-in-time inventory systems, we're giving up efficiency, but again, we'll be more resilient when some bad things happen, when these black swans raise their ugly heads. So I think for the meat industry, the livestock industry, I'm not looking for a real quick turnaround, excuse me, or fix to the markets there. I think that's going to be a couple years down the road. And then trying to figure out what everybody else is going to do. This is the curse of the free markets. Think about this. What if you decide to cut production on your farm to try and reduce the overall supply, but nobody else does? Net effect is that there's been basically no impact on supply, no impact on price, but your revenues are going to be significantly lower. So we need to think, the old production phrase in farm management is walk when everyone else runs. So we need to think, if everyone else is planting corn, maybe I don't want to be planting corn right now. So we need to think about that one. And what happens if you switch enterprises? You say, okay, I'm going to plant beans instead of corn this year for whatever reason, and everyone else makes that same decision. Well, guess what? Now you're going to have a large supply of beans, which leads to lower prices, which leads to financial hardships out there. So you need to take your best guess as far as what's going to happen to the planting intentions out there to make sure that we're diversifying ourselves from the overall market. Okay, so a couple of quick examples here about decisions you might be making. What if you want to store your crops until March rather than sell them at harvest? let's just look at the main added costs to see what's the bad side of doing this. Okay. And remember, the bad side is added costs or reduced revenues. Well, we're going to have added storage costs. This will be your rental costs, your electric costs, whatever it happens to be. There might be shrink. There might be quality deterioration, which could hurt your price as well. And think about this. When you store your crop, this means you're not receiving your revenues until 3, 4, 5 months into the future. So can you repay your operating line? And if not, you're going to have additional interest on that operating line. So we need to take that into account. And then if you're going to be looking at putting new facilities up, new storage facilities that gives you more flexibility with what you can do with your crop, don't forget to include the overhead costs, okay? These things are going to depreciate. That's an economic cost to you. You're going to have interest in those facilities. So we need to make sure we're repaying ourselves for that. There may be, excuse me, property taxes or insurance on this thing. A rough rule of thumb I use for storage facilities or buildings, I'll take the purchase price of that thing and multiply it by 10 to 15%, and I'll use that as an estimate of the annual overhead costs. And again, that'll be your depreciation, your interest, your property taxes, insurance premiums, those sorts of things. So those are going to be on your bad side. On your good side, well, hopefully we're going to get an added return by doing this. We're going to have higher price after storage, which from the Merck numbers, yeah, we're expecting 13 cents higher price for corn, but we're looking at a 10 cent per bushel decrease in soybeans. So we really need to take into consideration what's going to happen to our price. And again, we need to adjust for any shrink or quality loss you might have out there. So in this case, bottom line, if we're looking at storing our corn from now until March, can we do that for less than roughly 13 cents a bushel? That's roughly 3 cents a bushel per month. And that's going to be pretty tight. I'm not sure you can do that. But again, it depends on your individual situation. But the process here, let's look at the good side, look at the bad side. And if the bad side, if the good side is bigger than the bad side, we should increase your profits. You should be making a good decision. From a livestock standpoint, say you've got 550-pound wean calves and you're thinking of holding on to them, putting another 200 pounds of gain on them before you get rid of them, or maybe because of lack of processing in your area, we're sort of forced to do this. I'm not going to go through all the assumptions I have on here, but basically we're putting 200 pounds of gain on. We're looking at the current price of about $134 a hundredweight versus a future price, January, about $120 per hundredweight. And that's, I adjusted that for slide because we have heavier weight calves. So with that, looked at the feed equivalents and so on. And when we look at this situation, if we sell that weaned calf today, he'll bring in revenue of about $737. With the 750-pound calf, even though we have a lower price per hundredweight, we're going to have a higher total revenue, but we also have $108 more of costs, $93 of extra feed and about $15 extra for grain and vet and labor and whatever else you might have. So by doing this, we're looking at the change in return to your labor of $28 per head. So in this case, it looks like it makes economic sense to hold on to those calves under the assumptions that I made. But the nice thing about this is now then when we have these price projections, now we can calculate a break-even price. So if we look at the information here, I calculated the break-even price. And again, I adjusted for death loss and shrink, getting those calves to market. So as long as that selling price is above $116 a hundredweight at harvest, or excuse me, at sale, we will be better off by holding these calves. Another way to look at this is what's it cost you to put a pound of gain on your calves? In this case, if it's going to cost you more than 68 cents a pound for every pound of gain you put on, it's probably not worth it to hold these calves. You probably want to get rid of them a little bit sooner. So again, we're just looking at what's the good side, what's the bad side of making this decision. I get a lot of questions these days. Should I, since I'm expecting lower prices, should I use less inputs? And again, we just need to use that same thought process. What am I giving up by doing this? And what am I going to get in return? Examples might be, let's put less fertilizer down, or let's hire less labor. On the livestock side, maybe we'll reduce our herd size. But again, that depends on, do you have a market for those calves, trying to get rid of those cull cows and cull heifers today? But same process here. The bad side of the decision, if you cut back on your inputs, will you get lower yields or lower production, which means you should have lower revenues coming into your operation. Another thing we need to think about, what are the impacts on next year's production? If we cut back on fertilizer today, how's that going to impact soil quality? If we start cutting back on feed or vet expenses, what's going to happen to the reproductive efficiency of the herd? What's going to happen to your market? Say we're a vegetable producer, or we're in the shellfish industry. What if we cut back on production? Can we still meet what our market needs? And are we risking losing that market because we can't meet their demand? On the good side, what am I getting in return? Need to think about, you're cutting back on your input costs, so those should be lower. And if that's lower, we'll need less operating capital. So our operating loans or operating lines and interest on that will be a little bit lower as well. And then we can just compare the good side to the bad side. So that's sort of your thought process to get through anything. Keep it simple, stick to your fundamentals, understand your goals, and that will help you make better decisions. From a basic financial standpoint, I got about 4 or 5 tips for you here. Number one, develop or improve your record keeping system. This is one of the biggest problems in agriculture. Ag producers do not keep good records, and the records they do have probably aren't very useful for making decisions. So what I would very strongly recommend you do, work with your extension agent, work with your accountant, and develop enterprise accounting for your farm. This way, you know what each enterprise is going to cost you. So we can calculate our cost of production, we can calculate our break-evens. So enterprise accounting, I think, is crucial. If your only record system is your Schedule F, well, that lumps all your expenses together for all of your enterprises, so we don't know what our true cost of production is. Next piece of advice on your record-keeping system, set it up so that you're getting accrual or accrual-adjusted statements. This washes out the tax moves that you might be making. If you're increasing, or excuse me, if you're making prepayments on your feed or your fertilizer, that skews your cost of production. So we need to be able to match things up, and accrual adjustment or accrual basis accounting does that for us. So for your cost of production, you got your good cops and your bad cops here. Good cost of production, your good cops are based on accrual adjusted or accrual based enterprise accounts. Bad cost of production, if you're just using your cash based Schedule F, you're probably you're not making very good decisions. You don't have good information to deal with. So we need to work on this, develop an improved record keeping system. It will help you make tremendously better decisions. Next thing, develop a monthly cash flow statement or cash budget. And what this is, it's a list of all of the cash incomes and all of the cash outflows for the farm and your household. So this shows when cash is coming in, when cash is going out, where it's going. It's a very powerful tool. Let me real quick try and show you a copy. And hopefully, are you seeing the spreadsheet on your monitors there?
Yes, sir. We can see that, Dr. White.
You can see that. Okay, great. So this is just a basic cash flow statement. This one's quarterly. I'd recommend doing it monthly. But in this case, for each quarter, we're going to list the source of all cash inflows from the farm and from non-farm sources. We want to know where all the cash is coming in to your household. On the cash outflow section, I've tried to set this up so it matches your Schedule F. It should be in roughly the same order. So we can list out what our cash expenses are It does not include depreciation, so that's going to be a different from your Schedule F. So it's got all your farm-related expenses, but down here we've got any capital purchases, anything we purchased outside or we paid cash for. We've got our principal and interest payments on our term debt. We've got our family living expenses, and we're going to throw your income and payroll taxes in there as well. So that should be all of your cash flows, or excuse me, cash outflows for each quarter. And then the fun starts. The bottom third of this spreadsheet says, okay, here's my net cash flow for each quarter. And in finance, red is bad. So you can see 3 of the 4 quarters here, we have more cash leaving the household or leaving the business than we have coming in. Overall, for the year, we have more cash coming in than going out. So that's a good sign. But we need to think about how are we going to meet this cash deficit during these 3 quarters, so we can use this to talk with our lender and figure out how much operating line of credit we might need. We can use it to figure out when we should schedule payments if we're looking at getting new term debt. We can look at when we'll have cash available to make a down payment or a capital purchase for the operation. We'll know when we have money to set aside for savings or set aside for retirement and so on. So this is one of the most powerful management tools you have available to you. If you want a copy, just email me or Robbie. If they want to email you and I'll send you a copy, you can get it out to everybody. We can get you a copy of this. All right, let's go back here now. So there we go with your cash flow statement. This is extremely powerful. If you walk into your lender and you have a cash flow statement, this is going to dramatically improve the communication, and it's going to help you make better decisions throughout. Okay, next tip for you is maintain open communication with your lender. If 2020 and 2021 are going to be bad years as far as market prices and weather at this point, you need to think about your operating loan needs or your operating capital needs. So talk with your lender. Let them know I'm going to need this much to meet my operating needs. I can pay it back at this point in time. So these are, again, we can do this from the cash flow statement to get a good estimate of how much operating capital we're going to need. We can show the lender when we think we can pay it off. So we just maintain constant open communication with your lender. It's kind of natural for a lot of folks to stick their head in the sand and run and hide during bad times. Folks, I'll tell you right now, your lender doesn't want that. They would rather know that you're expecting to have problems rather than being surprised by them. So maintain that constant open communication, and your lender will thank you. They'll have more options available to work with you. Another piece of advice here is have a tax management plan. So many farmers are averse to paying income taxes, and because of that, they make decisions that don't make a whole lot of economic sense in my mind anyway. So we need to have a tax management plan, and my goal is not to minimize my taxes. My goal is to have more money left over after I pay my taxes. So I would rather have more cash available and pay a little bit in taxes than spend a whole lot more to avoid taxes completely. So when you look at self-employment taxes and income taxes, for most farms, we're probably in the 25 to 35% marginal tax range, which says if we're 35%, for every dollar of taxable income, you're going to, or say every extra dollar of taxable income, you're going to pay 35 cents in taxes. Well, if we use these numbers, in order to save $1 in taxes, you need to spend $3 to $4. So this would make capital purchases or prepaying your feeds or your fertilizers. You need to spend $3 or $4 to save $1 in taxes. I guess my thought is, what if you paid the $1 in taxes and you use that remaining $2 to $3 to build up your savings so you have a little bit more flexibility during bad times? Or we use that money to pay down your debts, pay down your operating loans, so it buys you more breathing space to be able to make your payments during bad times. Or how about this one? We use that money to spend it on the family. Let's take them on a vacation every now and again, or replace some household equipment rather than buying things on the farm that we don't really need. So just have a tax management plan. paying taxes is not a bad thing. You don't want to pay any more than you have to, but I would rather have more money left after I pay my taxes than have no taxes at all. So one example there is prepaying your expenses. When you do this, realize you need an exit plan. I'll give you an example of that here in a second. And remember, when you make prepaid, or you're prepaying some of your expenses, that's an unsecured transaction. If you pay $100,000 to your local supply store, and if they go bankrupt, guess what? You stand in line behind all their other creditors. This is an unsecured transaction. So we need to make sure whoever making these prepayments to is in pretty good financial condition. And then another thing we can do is if we do have a tax loss, let's talk with our accountant and see if we can use the carry back or the carry forward of those losses to manage our taxes. We can go back 2 years of tax records, or we can carry them forward until we've used up that tax loss from this year. So here's a quick example on prepaying your expenses. Last year, let's assume you paid $50,000 for your feed or your fertilizer in December, trying to reduce your taxable income. If we're in a 30% marginal tax bracket, doing this saved you $15,000 in taxes, okay? So we paid $50,000 or prepaid $50,000. We saved ourselves $15,000. But again, look at that. We had to spend a little bit more than $3 to save $1 in taxes. But assume this year's a bad year. We're not going to have a good yield. We're not going to have a low price. We are going to have a low price. Now then, you might not have a whole lot of cash available. And you might not, because it's been a bad year or two, you might not be able to get a line of credit from your lender to make the prepayment in this December. Well, we've already expensed that $50,000 of feed or fertilizer last year, and we have nothing left to offset our revenues for this year. So at a minimum, if we don't make a prepayment this year, your taxable income is going to be $50,000 higher, even though it's a bad year. So you might be faced with paying taxes, even though you've had a really bad cash flow year as far as price is concerned. So have a plan. Prepaying your expenses makes sense, but just be sure that once you start doing this, you have an exit plan so that for a bad year, how are we going to manage that situation if we can't make a prepayment? Another one, I got my grumpy farmer down here in the corner. Why pay money to the government? Again, you need to spend $30,000 to $40,000 to save $10,000 in taxes. If you're going to make a tax move at the end of the year, if your accountant says, hey, you're going to have profits this year, go buy something. If you buy something that is going to make you more efficient or make you more profitable, it's probably a decent move. I'm not going to argue that. But if you're just going to go out and buy something you don't really need, you're going to buy something simply to write it off on taxes, but it's not going to increase your efficiency or your profitability. You spent $3 or $3 to $4 to save $1, which means you have a lot less cash available for other uses. By doing this, you've hurt your liquidity. You don't have any money or have as much money sitting in savings. We've hurt our profitability because now we have more assets on our balance sheet. So your rate of return on assets is going to look a lot lower. And we've hurt our financial efficiency. Our capital turnover ratio is going to be a lot lower because we have unused or little used equipment sitting around. If we borrow money to make this purchase, now we've compounded things. We've hurt our liquidity, our profitability, and efficiency, but we've also hurt our solvency and our repayment ability. And just real quick, guess what ag lenders use to evaluate your financial condition? They look at liquidity, solvency, repayment ability, profitability, and financial efficiency. So by making this tax move to buy something, again, that you don't need, this is not a good use of money, in my opinion. I would rather pay the taxes and have more money left over so I have more flexibility in the future. So that's me on my soapbox about tax moves, buying something that you don't actually need. And then to finish up here, we've got the same old, you always hear me preaching. Build your liquidity, build your emergency savings from both the household and the business. And a good number to use is somewhere between 3 and 6 months worth of normal expenses. From a lending standpoint, if your working capital to expenses ratio, working capital is nothing more than current assets minus your current liabilities. Divide that by your total expenses for the year. We would like that number to be greater than 25%, which says you have enough money in savings or in available working capital to cover roughly 3 months worth of normal business expenses. So if we have this, it's going to help you get through the downtimes a little bit easier. This is sort of like a shock absorber on your business. It gets you through those minor potholes. Next thing, have a clear and defined marketing plan. Don't go in there trying to get the absolute highest price. Chances are you're not going to do it, but know what your cost of production is. Set your break-even prices, or know what your break-even prices are, and set your marketing plan up so that we are at least covering those cash expenses. So I'd rather make a little bit of money every year than the chance of making a lot one year but losing a lot the next year. So we need to have good price protection out there through a clear, defined marketing plan, and stick to your fundamentals. Don't get greedy and don't get too emotional with your decisions. You need to stick to your fundamentals. And then the last main thing, just have a risk management plan on hand. Have backup markets, backup suppliers, backup input processors for you. Think about what your liability insurance needs are, how you might be affected by a lawsuit, and then think about an estate or a transition plan, just in case something happens to somebody in the operation. Did we have somebody leave the operation because of death or disability or family fight or whatever, or better opportunity? So have a transition plan. Start working on that one. And let me pull this up for you. If you can see this, Robbie, I'll send you a link, but this is it's called the Farm Business Transition Workbook by Farm Credit University. It's a great way to get started on setting up your operation or your transition plan. It consolidates a lot of information that your heirs or your successors are going to need in case something happens to you. And best of all, it's free. So I would definitely think about doing that. Use some of the time this summer to start thinking about your estate plan, your transition plan, and how we're going to move into the future. So with that, Robbie, everybody, I'm pretty much done. Do you have any questions for me?
Thank you, Dr. White. We really appreciate all that great information. You taking the time to join us this morning. I think it was an excellent presentation. I guess we'll start. I noticed we had a couple of comments or questions there in the chat box. If you happen to have the link to that workbook that you were just showing there, if you could post that in the chat box, that would at least be available for the folks that are joining us that have the access to that. But if you could send it to us agents as well, we'd be glad to get that out.
Okay, I will. I'll
let's see.
Multitask here.
I guess the first question, Taylor Clark, one of our agents, he asked, what are the regulatory challenges to decentralizing meat processing? And I think there was a little bit of a conversation going on there between him and Rachel Henley, another agent. And I guess they were just asking maybe for some of your comments or thoughts on that for decentralizing the meat market here in Virginia.
Yeah, that's the regulatory side is going to be a big challenge to overcome. But I think that with the government seeing that we are very vulnerable should something happen to just a couple of players in the meat processing, supply chain there, I think we'll start to see see that loosening up a little bit. And I think we'll start to see a little bit more creativity or entrepreneurship on the regulatory side. And another example of this is pharmaceuticals. I think I've read in The Economist magazine that 90% of U.S. pharmaceuticals come from China. So when that supply was impacted last fall and the spring, that's a massive impact on the country. So I think we're going to move away from this strict efficiency, trying to get as efficient as possible, to be a little bit more resilient, a little bit more able to handle disruptions in the supply chain. And that's going to require some regulatory changes out there. So I think that's going to happen. How quickly, again, is that going to happen? I don't know. There's a lot of lobbyists involved and a lot of politicians involved. but I think there will be changes in that to make it more economically efficient, or how about this, just better for the country if we do have a less concentrated meat supply chain there.
Rachel, Taylor, if y'all are joining us, anything you'd like to add to that, or facilitate any more discussion with that?
Like I say, if I guess some of my thought process in that, if you're not sure what I'm thinking about, in the old days, back when I was a kid, we had you, and when you went to any grocery store, they had a butcher in the back of the store, or your small town markets, they all had a butcher. They were buying carcasses from a federally inspected operation, and then they were breaking them down so they could supply their local markets. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the future, or at least the availability of that. I think the big issue there is just being safe, from a food safety standpoint, getting the carcass from the kill station to the breaking station. Other than that, I think most of your regulations at the breaking station are going to be similar to what they are today. So, yeah. Rachel, Taylor, anything?
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I put in the comments, like some of our local smaller producers have kind of been talking about this for quite a while, of like even how to cooperatively go together to even have like a freezer truck that they could all use, because they don't have the supply large enough that would warrant 1 or 2 or 3 of them going in together to try to go into an investment such as putting their own facility together. But I love the idea of kind of separating the slaughter from the carcass breakdown. And funny enough, I had a conversation with my soon-to-be sister-in-law. Her grandfather had a small store in New Kent, and all the butcher stuff, they had that at the store. And so to break down the carcasses. So I was like, that is so cool. I want to see it. And I remember one that was in Ashland where Sheetz now sits, that used to have that in the back. And I think we'll see some return to that, like Alex said, because it just shows how fragile our system is. I think some people have probably seen, there's some good articles going around talking about, how now you can see the system, how fragile it is when you have something like this. And it's very uncommon that this would happen all the time. But from a biosecurity standpoint, terrorism, we talk about that sometimes. It shows where we're weak, and we can definitely work on ways to kind of meet in the middle ground and not be the most efficient and cost effective, but still be able to be resilient a little better through hard times. So I'd love to talk more about it, Alex.
I've always assumed that part of the reason for the consolidation in a lot of businesses in a large part is due to the ability to efficiently manage regulatory cost of compliance. That was the reason for my question is, we see that with stuff that we work with producers every day, is that, we have a new requirement for a producer to comply with that has cost of doing it, and they really don't have the revenue from what they're doing to make it becomes a big part of that enterprise budget. One example is, having with tobacco producers that use soil fumigants, they have to have 2 people on the farm fit tested annually. We are offering a program. It costs $75 to do that a person, plus the cost of maintaining the respirator and all. So that ends up being $2 or $3 an acre on the average producer to meet that requirement. So I think that has an impact.
Yes, I would agree with that. A lot of this centralization or concentration is strictly due to the cost of the regulation that's been imposed. But I can, I think we can start to get around that if we get creative, like I say, with these smaller braking stations set up around. I'm starting to hear a lot more talk of localities putting together smaller processing stations that can be they can meet the demand, and there's enough supply in the area from local producers to do that. But again, I've had a lot of conversations over the years with some meat processors, and almost to a person, they say you just can't open a brand spanking new meat processing plant today due to the cost. It's primarily written up by the regulation. So, it's written up by that. So yeah, it's
Alex, do you see? Sorry. Do you see part of this then? I always get back to labor, and that being like a big issue, and not only just like labor, but also like some of it is skilled labor. I know we've gone very mechanized, but I know we still have the meat science, food science at Tech, but it's not extremely large and booming as in other states. Do you think that like some of that is going to be a challenge? I know like Allegheny Meats has struggled to like keep like a manager, and some of that could be pay structure or just business, the amount of supply that's coming through there. But do you think that's going to be an issue at all?
Yes, definitely. This labor supply or skilled labor, trained labor for something like meat processing industry is extremely in short supply. But you know what? I think we can train people and get them up and running pretty quickly in that field. Virginia Tech has talked about hosting some training workshops or schools. I don't know what the status of that is, but I would love to see it happen. Heck, I'd go through it. I think it would be interesting. But yeah, on a labor standpoint, there's, it's not the most glamorous career out there probably, but it can be a good career. So I think there's possibility out there for someone with a good work ethic, someone that is trainable. I think, if we can find a way to supply food to the U.S. population, I think that gives us an awful lot of job security. So on the processing side, yes, there is a labor issue. Any other questions or anything else I can help you with?
Alex, this is Sally Farrell. I'm the 4-H agent in Craig, but I'm also covering the ag. And I just moved back from Maine, where I was a 4-H agent and ag agent. And we did some schools there with meat cutting, and we had a lot of processors that were interested in it. And our livestock specialists worked with some processing plants, and they did, a lot of the people came in and they cut up beef, hogs, and lambs, and it was a whole week-long school that they did. And I thought maybe we might have some interest in doing that.
I would bet there's a lot of interest, Sally, and welcome back. If you're just right next door to me here. But yeah, I think there can be a lot of interest in that. If nothing else, also, during deer season or some of the other hunting seasons, it gives people something to do, another stream of income, and another way to basically spread out the fixed costs of those, of all the equipment facilities they need to be, or whatever their processing plant is. So I think there's a pent-up demand. I think we can get a decent audience available for something like that. Any other questions? Anything else I can?
Dr. White, Mike Broadus here.
Yes.
2 questions. And again, thank you for showing up and working with us on this. The first question, the general feel I'm getting from you here is the next 2 years might be a little rough price-wise. Is that correct?
I would think so. There's been such an upheaval, such a disruption in the marketing chain and so on. It's just not equitable at the moment. So I think the market's going to take a little bit of while to straighten themselves out. from the livestock industry, the calf prices, the finished calf prices you're getting have been driven very low, but because there is a meat shortage, retail prices are high. So the retailers and the processors are doing well, but the actual livestock producers aren't. I think that's got to change, but it's not going to happen overnight. So I'm looking for probably at least 2 years of uncertain, relatively uncertain prices.
Yes, sir. I've got some grain farmers here in Caroline that are starting to hyperventilate, thinking that corn's not going to get up close to $4 again for a while. So I'm listening to you on your try to be more efficient. The second question was, you mentioned prepaying costs for a crop or a flock, a herd of cattle for feed or fertilizer or seed, and most of the farmers that really have their act together seem to do that normally. And what they'll do is get halfway through their harvest, and at that point, the decision is made, okay, now I do need a new combine, or maybe I don't need a combine. You're saying this coming year not necessarily think like that? To hold on to prepaying fertilizer, seed, or feed?
Well, sort of mixing some concepts in there. For the prepaying of your inputs, a lot of times that does make sense because if your livestock operation, you're going to need feed. You know that, and it's going to, it's necessary. Same thing with your fertilizer and seed and chemicals and so on. So, but again, my point there is in that 1 year that you don't make a prepayment, you're facing a significant tax hit. So, if it's a bad year, you still might have to pay taxes. As far as buying equipment, this is where I start to, again, I get kind of riled on this one. If you're buying something that is, if your combine's worn out, if it's older technology, if you can be more productive or more efficient by purchasing the new combine, a new tractor or whatever, that makes sense to me. If you're just buying it because you want to reduce taxes, to me, that makes no sense at all. And if you're in the middle ground there, well, I might need it in the future. I've got the cash now. Should I do it? That can make some economic sense to me. But I tend to be relatively conservative over the next couple of years. I would be thinking I would rather put more money in my checking and savings account rather than having a new piece of equipment out there that's, especially if it's not going to make me significantly more productive or more efficient. I would much rather have cash sitting on hand. And here's where the top producers or the top financial folks sort of get upset. They'll say, oh, that money's not earning me anything. It's not doing me any good sitting there in a savings account. Well, guess what? I'd agree in a normal situation. But when bad times come around, you have cash available and other people don't. And that gives you a lot more opportunities. It gives you the opportunity to take advantage of the 210 net 30 type cash discounts you can get. So in bad times, that cash comes in really handy. So again, sort of like we were talking about with the meat processing, to be more profitable, heck yeah, let's put that money that's invested in something that's going to be earning for me. But to help get through the bad times, I would rather have cash sitting in the checking account rather than having a piece of equipment sitting in the barn. Because remember, if we write off that piece of equipment on our taxes, its tax base is going to be zero. So if you have to sell that thing to generate cash, 100% of that's going to be subject to your capital gains taxes. So, Mike, it's kind of a double-edged sword there. For your operating needs, it probably makes sense if you want to make your prepayments on that. But again, you need an exit plan that for what happens in that 1 year you don't make that prepayment. But if you're just buying something for the sake of reducing taxes, I think you're throwing $3 or $4 out the window that have much better use.
Thank you, sir.
Certainly.
Any other questions for Dr. White this morning? I think everybody, I knew there at first we had some issues, but everyone should have their ability to unmute themselves now. So if you have a question or comment, please feel free to share that with us. There's some great discussion this morning.
And I sent copies of my spreadsheet and the farm transition workbook. I sent that to Laura. So Laura, you can make that available however you want. Sorry, I don't have a link to them. I just have actual physical files.
Thank you.
So any other question, anything else I can help you out with, or any other ideas for topics that people need to be hearing or would like more information on?
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, agents, for putting it together.
Certainly. Glad to help, Rachel. And let me know what I can do on your market research or your meat processing deal. I think we're onto something there. I've been saying that for 10 years. I just haven't done anything about it.
Amen. Me neither. So
But now
it's
we have
like,
plenty of
now's
time,
the time.
All right. Well, not hearing any more questions. We just like to take a few seconds and thank you again, Dr. White, for joining us this morning. We appreciate all your time and expertise. It was a great presentation. Hopefully our clients and producers find some benefit with that. So thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Certainly, Robbie. Appreciate you guys asking me. And again, when you're working with your clients out there, or if you're a producer, just keep it simple. Think through that partial budget format and stick to your fundamentals like you've been doing. You'll make it through. I have faith in you.
Well, thank you, Dr. White. We appreciate that encouragement. The other point I'll make real quick, two more quick announcements before we finish up this morning. You could see on your screen a few moments ago, we have developed an evaluation for this program. So if you're joining us as an agent or faculty within VCE or producer, just anyone that's on the line with us this morning, if you would just take a couple of minutes to fill out that evaluation, go to that link. It's just a real short evaluation to ask some questions to help us, better be able to help you and provide the information that you need during these times. So please take the opportunity to do that if you could for us. We'll also be posting that link for the evaluation with the recordings of this presentation and presentations we've had before. The final announcement I'll make is next Thursday, we're going to be joined by Dr. Tremaine Hatch. We're going to have a viticulture update for all the vineyard folks. So we look forward to that. So if you know someone that could be a benefit to, that's going to be same time, same place here next Thursday, May 28th. We're going to have that viticulture update. So finally, I'd just like to thank everyone again for joining us this morning. I'd like to thank the team of agents that I'm working with, my colleagues, Trent Jones in Northumberland and Lancaster County, Laura Maxine in Hanover, Stephanie Romelchek in Westmoreland, and Mike Broadus in Caroline and King George. So thank you to those agents for making this possible. And thank you again, Dr. White, for joining us this morning. We really appreciate that. So hope everyone stays safe. And thank you all again for joining us this morning. And we look forward to seeing you all again next week.